In 2003, South Africa made a decision that most wildlife officials thought was either bold or reckless. They loaded 31 black rhinos onto trucks, not to a zoo, not to a sanctuary, to a location so remote, so deliberately hidden, that even the rangers involved didn't know the full coordinates until the day of transport. The mission had one goal: save a species that was disappearing faster than anyone could stop. Black rhinos had been hunted, poached, and pushed to the edge of extinction for decades. In 1970, there were over 65,000 of them across Africa. By 2003, fewer than 3,600 remained on the entire continent. So conservationists took a gamble. They chose a secret reserve deep in the South African interior. No public access, no disclosed location, no media presence. Just 31 animals, thousands of acres of wilderness, and a plan that had never been attempted at this scale before. The world didn't hear about it. That was intentional. Because the moment poachers knew where the rhinos were, the mission was over. For 16 years, almost nothing leaked out. No updates, no press releases, no confirmation the animals had even survived. Then, in 2019, the gates opened. And what the research teams documented inside that reserve didn't just surprise them. It changed how conservation science understood large mammal recovery entirely. This is what happened. The reserve didn't have a name on any public map. It was registered under a land trust, buried in bureaucratic paperwork, designed to look like an ordinary private game farm. The South African National Parks Authority and a small team of conservation specialists were the only ones who knew what was really happening inside those fences. The fences themselves were the first problem. Electrified, double-layered, over 200 kilometers of perimeter cutting through dense thorn bush and rocky highland terrain. It took 8 months just to secure the boundary before a single animal was moved. The relocation itself was one of the most physically demanding wildlife operations ever attempted in southern Africa. Black rhinos are not cooperative animals. They are territorial, aggressive, and highly sensitive to stress. Transporting one is dangerous. Transporting 31 across hundreds of kilometers without losing a single animal to injury or cardiac arrest from shock, that was considered nearly impossible by several veterinary teams consulted at the time. But they did it. Over 3 separate transport phases, all 31 animals arrived. The youngest was just under 2 years old. The oldest, a bull estimated at 19, had survived 2 previous poaching attempts. He carried an old bullet fragment lodged near his left shoulder blade. Rangers named him Karoo, not officially, just among themselves. They tracked him more than any other animal in those early months, because Karoo did something unexpected almost immediately after release. He didn't explore the reserve. He walked the entire perimeter fence. All of it. Over 4 days, he traced the boundary like he was measuring it, like he was deciding something. The rangers watching the telemetry data didn't know what to make of it. But within 6 weeks, they would. 6 weeks after release, the telemetry team noticed something in the data they couldn't immediately explain. Karoo had stopped moving, not slowed down, stopped. For nearly 72 hours, his GPS signal showed him stationary in the northwestern corner of the reserve. The same corner where the fence had a subtle geographical weakness. A dry riverbed that ran beneath the boundary line during the summer flood season. The rangers sent a ground team to investigate. What they found wasn't a breach. It was something quieter than that. Karoo was standing at the edge of that dry riverbed, motionless, in the shade of a cluster of acacia trees. And around him, without any planning or direction from the conservation team, 4 other rhinos had gathered in the same spot. They weren't a family group. They hadn't arrived together. 3 of them had been relocated from completely different provinces. But somehow, within 6 weeks, they had found each other in the largest, most concealed corner of the reserve. The lead ecologist on the project, a man named Dr. Hendrik Voss, had spent 22 years studying black rhino behavior. He later said in an internal report that he had never observed spontaneous congregation like this in a species widely documented as solitary. Black rhinos don't gather. That's not an opinion. It's one of the most consistent behavioral facts in the scientific literature. And yet, here they were, 5 animals, together, calm. The team didn't interfere. They pulled back and watched. Over the next 3 months, that northwestern corner became the most visited area in the entire reserve, by rhinos that had no biological reason to be there. What was drawing them to that specific location, nobody could say with certainty. But the answer, when it finally came, would rewrite part of what the team thought they understood about these animals entirely. The dry riverbed wasn't dry. not underneath. A geological survey commissioned in late 2004 revealed something the original site assessment had missed entirely. Beneath that northwestern corner, roughly 4 meters below the surface, ran a slow-moving underground water channel. It wasn't marked on any regional map. It had likely been flowing for centuries, completely hidden beneath compacted clay and rock sediment. The rhinos had detected it, not through sight, not through any mechanism the team could directly observe, but through ground vibration, moisture traces in the soil, and possibly, according to Dr. Voss, infrasonic sensitivity that science had documented in elephants but never seriously investigated in rhinoceros species. The discovery shifted everything. The conservation team quietly restructured the entire reserve management plan around the water channel. They dug 3 strategic access points along its path. Within 18 months, the vegetation density in that corridor had increased by a measurable margin. More cover, more grazing, more stability. And then in 2006, something happened that nobody had planned for. The first calf was born, then a second. 7 weeks later, by the end of that year, 4 calves had survived past the critical 90-day threshold, the point at which rhino calf mortality risk drops significantly. 4 calves in 1 year, from a founding population of 31 animals, was a reproduction rate that exceeded every projection the team had modeled. But the number wasn't what disturbed Dr. Voss. It was the location of every single birth. All 4 calves were born within 300 meters of that underground water channel, in the same corner where Carew had stood motionless for 72 hours 3 years earlier. The old bull hadn't been lost. He hadn't been confused. He had been leading. And what the team discovered next suggested he wasn't done. By 2009, the population had grown to 47 animals. That number sounds like a success story, and it was. But it also created a problem nobody had fully anticipated. The reserve had been designed for 31 rhinos. The carrying capacity, the amount of food, water, and territory the land could sustainably support had been calculated around that founding number. 47 animals was pushing that limit, and Carew, now estimated at 25 years old, was showing it. His ranging patterns had changed. Where he once moved slowly and predictably through the northwestern corridor, he was now covering almost twice the daily distance. The telemetry team noticed he was repeatedly approaching the eastern boundary, not the weak point near the riverbed, the opposite side entirely, the side that bordered a narrow and fenced government corridor, a strip of land connecting 2 separate protected areas that had never been formally incorporated into the reserve. Rangers flagged it immediately. A boundary breach by a 25-year-old bull in deteriorating condition wasn't just a conservation problem. It was a security problem. Outside that eastern fence was open communal land, farms, villages, roads, and beyond those roads, the same poaching networks that had been systematically dismantled inside. The reserve's secrecy were very much still operating in the surrounding region. In 2010, the reserve's lead security coordinator, a former South African National Defense Force officer named Ruan Steyn, made a quiet request to provincial wildlife authorities. He wanted to expand the eastern boundary, absorb the government corridor, double the monitored perimeter. The request was denied. Budget constraints, jurisdictional complications, intergovernmental delays. The standard reason. Steyn documented his concern in writing and filed it. 14 months later, that filing would become evidence in a criminal investigation, because something came through that eastern boundary that nobody had managed to stop. In early 2011, 3 poachers crossed the eastern boundary on foot. They had maps, detailed ones, hand-drawn, but accurate enough that investigators later concluded someone with internal knowledge had provided them. They knew the patrol rotation. They knew the blind spots in the camera coverage. They moved at 2 a.m. during a shift change window that lasted exactly 19 minutes. They were professionals, but they didn't find what they came for, because Carew wasn't where the map said he would be. None of the rhinos were. In the weeks leading up to the incursion, the entire population had quietly shifted westward, away from the eastern corridor, back toward the underground water channel in the northwest. Steyn's security team only pieced this together afterward, reviewing the telemetry logs with a wildlife ecologist brought in during the investigation. The shift had begun 11 days before the breach. 11 days before any human in the reserve had any indication that something was wrong. The poachers were intercepted at 3:17 a.m. by a patrol team that had been rerouted based on unusual rhino movement flagged by the overnight monitoring system. No animals were lost. All 3 men were arrested. The internal source was identified 4 months later, a reserve logistics contractor who had held access clearance for less than a year. He was prosecuted, convicted, sentenced, but the story didn't end with the arrest, because the boundary expansion Stain had requested was finally approved in 2012. The government corridor was absorbed, the perimeter grew, and with the additional land, the reserve's carrying capacity increased enough to support controlled, documented redistribution. Between 2013 and 2019, 17 rhinos from the secret reserve were carefully relocated to 3 other protected areas across southern Africa. 17 animals seeded into ecosystems that had been empty of black rhinos for decades. By 2019, when the reserve's existence was quietly acknowledged in a South African conservation report, the founding population of 31 had become the origin point for over 90 documented individuals across the region. Dr. Voss, in his final project summary, wrote one line that stayed with everyone who read it. He said the rhinos didn't survive because of the plan. They survived because the land was right, the animals adapted faster than the science predicted, and because an old bull with a bullet fragment in his shoulder somehow found the one place in 50,000 acres where the ground held water. Karoo was last tracked in 2017. His signal went quiet on a Tuesday morning in June. He was estimated to be around 33 years old. That's near the upper limit of a black rhino's natural lifespan in the wild. The rangers didn't find a carcass. They found tracks leading into the dense thorn bush along the northwestern corridor. And then nothing. Just the land he had mapped on his first week, still holding water beneath the surface. Still carrying the population he had, in his own way, helped hold together. If this kind of story is what you come here for, real, grounded, and worth your time, subscribing takes 1 second and it means we can keep making them.